Hi, my name is Stephanie, and today I have a very special guest, Andy from IndieAndy, joining me today for a special UK versus US video.
Hi guys, I'm Andy and I run the YouTube channel known as IndieAndy, and basically on the channel I talk about being autistic, different views that I have about autism and different autism related topics, in my opinion on things. And basically I'm 26, I live in the UK, I'm autistic. Ever since I was 5 when I was diagnosed. So my story's a little bit different to Stephanie's, where she was diagnosed as an adult. I was diagnosed much younger, and I feel that during the course of this video you'll be able to find a lot of similarities and differences between us. So I think that's about it for my introduction, but just before we get into the video I just want to thank you, Stephanie, for wanting me on your channel, wanting to collaborate with me and wanting to share your platform with me by letting me basically ruin your channel and ruin this video by having this face on it. But no, hope everyone enjoys the video and let's just get straight on with it.
So the first thing is, how do schools handle autistic children?
To be honest, with this question I'm a little bit unsure, but I feel if you have a diagnosis of autism, that makes things a lot easier. And if things are in place, like provisions, whether your child needs to get a taxi from the house to the school, and you know there is a plan, like a educational health care plan, or an EHCP in the UK, like you guys in America have an IEP, I believe it is. You know, if a plan for your child is in place, it makes everything a lot easier. But to be honest, when it comes to the schools handling autistic children, it really is an individual basis then. Like, I can't really speak for everyone who has gone into school and stuff, but for me it was a lot of work getting the right support. I think my parents had to really fight to get me the right support that I needed at that time, because I was not really well equipped for mainstream education. So I was, you know, in mainstream education, but I was also in a specialized unit for people with autism such as myself to improve my communication. So I did things around communication skills. But I do feel that some autistic children will have such difficulties that they are really unable to learn the normal way. And I feel that because of the way education is in the UK and just the lack of funding for schools, and you know there's more children but there's less staff to handle, you know, autistic children, just children in general in schools, I feel that autistic children, you know, have the potential to, you know, get lost in the cracks, as it were.
So in the US, the way that they usually handle it depends on whether they have a diagnosis and the severity of where they are on the spectrum. Those with a diagnosis often are granted what is called an IEP, so that's an individualized education plan, something to that effect. And they might have different classes and stuff like that. And then others are just placed like in straight all special needs only classes. And then there are people like me who are more what would have been considered Asperger's. Now, I didn't have a diagnosis, so I can't say for everyone, but I'm pretty sure there were probably some other neurodiverse people in my classes. But we would have advanced classes that would be more about concepts and stuff like that instead of just redundant worksheet work. And we also had a special class that we went out to in one of our programs that would focus more on creative things and skills that were really helpful for critical thinking and stuff like that. If the public school is deemed to not be able to help the child, they might be able to get a separate grant or a separate kind of money appropriation thing going on to be able to let them use those funds towards education at a school specifically for their condition or whatnot, to be able to help them better. So there are also autism only and special needs only schools, though I never went to one. So for me, school was school. I actually ended up being online schooled after 8th grade. So I finished 8th grade in the public school system and I was in special classes for advanced classes where we talked more the whole concepts and creative side of things. And then I went to online school where I just kind of did things at my own pace on the computer. I don't think my experience was horrible. I did experience some minor bullying. It was maybe your typical experience with rude people, and a lot of times I probably wasn't affected because I didn't realize some of the things that people were doing were mean to me, and stuff like that. I didn't have a whole lot of friends. I did have a good amount of acquaintances. Not a lot of people I would consider like really close to me. I usually had like one or two close girlfriends that I would like stay at their house or something like that. And I had different friends from different friend groups. I wasn't really the kind of person to stay in a particular clique for a long time, stuff like that. But that's just my personal experience. What is the diagnostic process like?
In the UK, when it comes to diagnosing autism, the route to diagnosis is quite varied. I feel this might be the same in the US as well, but typically the traditional route would be to go and see a GP or a general practitioner. Now in the UK, when it comes to diagnosing autism, basically a person will go through a series of different tests. And it depends also if they are a child or an adult. If they are a child, to my understanding, kids have a series of behavioural tests, cognitive tests to see how they function and how they adapt and how they do certain tasks. And also a lot of it as well is having conversations with not only their parents, but having conversations with the child, with school, nursery, people who are not associated with the family, so maybe a professional of some description, maybe a speech and language therapist or an OT, occupational therapist. With the adult tests, again, this is just from my own understanding. I'm not entirely sure if this is the case, but from what I understand, the process is basically the same, only it's a little bit more asking the person how they feel and getting an idea of what their childhood was like, and trying to understand what their struggles were in childhood, and if they experience the same things now, how they cope with things. And really that is the traditional route to diagnosis. You'd go to see your GP, who would then refer you on to a autism specialist. But I've also heard stories where children don't get diagnosed as children, they get diagnosed in their teens, and you know, they've gone through tremendous hardship and their mental health's quite bad, so they've gone into CAMS, which is Children and Adolescent Mental Health Services, and basically they get diagnosed while they're in CAMS. Or you might have a kid and you're being seen by a health practitioner, a health visitor, and basically they can refer you on to autism services, or at least point you in the right direction. But that is just generally the process of getting a diagnosis of autism in the UK.
So here in the US, we follow the DSM-5, but the actual process of being diagnosed is pretty varied from doctor to doctor. So you can go to one doctor and they might give you some sort of assessment. You might go to another doctor, they give you a different type of assessment. You go to another doctor, they might just ask you a bunch of questions instead of giving you an assessment. Some people are gonna require you to go through certain screenings, some people aren't. I think it's a little more diverse when it comes to adults, that's my personal experience with it, than it is with children. With children, they seem to be able to, they use the screening tools from places like Autism Speaks that they've put out and stuff like that for the really young children. And I'm assuming, this is an assumption here, that a lot of those screening tools are pretty standardized across the board, but once you start getting older, it's just kind of, it varies, but they're basically finding that information to determine whether or not you meet DSM-5 criteria for being a person on the autism spectrum. Now, my personal experience with that, I have actually detailed my going to my general doctor in another video. I'll go ahead and link for you. But then I went to a psychologist and there were some things that went on there. But eventually, basically, we talked about the possibility of autism. And then I also talked to a psychiatrist in tandem with the psychologist, and then they kind of compared notes as well. So between asking me a lot of questions about my childhood and observing me and just kind of asking me general questions about how I experienced things when I was a child and even now, they came to a conclusion for a diagnosis. Now, other people may have to go in for like a special test and stuff like that. It varies from person to person where you go and stuff like that. How do you feel the general public's understanding or feelings toward autism is?
In terms of the UK and people's understandings and feelings towards autism, especially in the last 5 to 10 years or so, there's been a massive increase into the amount of awareness of autism, especially around the month of April, which is World Autism Awareness Month as well. You know, times like that, you know, it really, really pushes the understanding of autism, what it's like to be autistic, and just getting viewpoints from autistic people as well. Though I do feel that the understanding of autism is generally better compared to the US, that's just from my personal point of view. There is still stigma about autism, like people still have these generic views of autism such as, oh, you know, autism is basically Rain Man on a stick. Autistic people are emotionless and really good at maths and computers and stuff, which, yes, some people on the spectrum are good at that stuff, but not everyone. And I still feel that in the UK we still have this issue of pigeonholing autistic people. And it's not just autism either, it's like literally any other condition that exists in this known world. I still feel we have a long way to go to reach a level of understanding where, you know, it's okay to be different, it's okay to be different, it's okay to just generally be us, really, and just to accept us, really, for who we are, and just to accept autism is one of those things that has many variables, but we are all still us at the end of the day. Like, we're not people with third eyes or anything like that. We're still people at the end of the day, you know?
I think that we are coming to a place where people are more aware of autism as its existence. I think that the area in which I live in the United States could definitely use some awareness and just understanding and more education on the whole matter. I run across a lot of people who think, you know, autism is just children or autism is just severe autism, and we still kind of have that kind of issue going on. I do think that people, just from my experience with people online, definitely still have a pretty big stigma towards autism, and that being, you know, using it as an insult, as a joke, and stuff like that. And I feel like Americans tend to be a little more comfortable making that kind of joke maybe than other countries. I may be wrong. That's just how I've perceived it. But that's actually really why I want to be able to get out there and start talking to people to really bring better awareness, but also acceptance and understanding of what autism is, and supports for those who may not even know that they're autistic and haven't had that kind of support like I didn't. To be able to help change the perspective and the perception of autism here in the US. What or who do you feel has the most prominent voice or influence when it comes to autism and policy, as well as how it's marketed toward the general public?
In the UK, the most prevalent voice in terms of organisations or charities would have to be in the National Autistic Society, which I am a content creator for, oddly enough. So I feel that my views on the society itself are a little bit biased in that regard. But when it comes to the National Autistic Society, I feel they are very influential in the way they help the government with autism-related policies and just really introducing inclusivity into parliamentary acts. A lot of the media companies and, you know, these big TV shows that talk about autism, they often go to the National Autistic Society as a fundamental resource in order to get the facts correct, and making sure that the facts and the way autism is being talked about is relevant, it is correct, it's not going to be hurtful to people. There are other charities who also talk about autism, but the National Autistic Society is one of the biggest and has a lot of influence. But I personally feel, in terms of this US versus UK aspect to the video, I feel that NAS is one of those organisations that, yes, does have flaws, yes, they've made mistakes in their past, but I don't feel that they are necessarily a bad organisation. I feel, in fact, that they are one of those organisations that actually does good for autistic people. And I know there'll be some people who disagree with me with that, but that's just what I feel from working with them and making content for them. Like, I don't think they're a bad company or they have any kind of massive controversy behind them. I definitely feel there's a lot more controversy when it comes to Autism Speaks compared to the National Autistic Society. So, yeah.
So here in the United States, I'd really think that that would be Autism Speaks. Before I knew anything about Autism Speaks, before I knew really anything about autism, I already knew their name. So I think that they are definitely the most prominent organization. I wasn't familiar that people really talked about autism online and as individual influencers and stuff like that. So I think right now they have definitely the most prominent voice. I think that that should probably change just from what I've been looking into with that particular organization. But I do think that they definitely have had control of the narrative for autism for quite a while in our country. And our final question is, how does employment work for someone on the spectrum?
In the UK, we can disclose our autism to our employer. Like, it's not something that is required, it's not mandatory. But I have this experience of disclosing my autism to an employer and not disclosing my autism to an employer. And basically, you can disclose it, and I have in the past, like I say, and it really helped me because they were able to actually improve the skills that I already had and things that gave me anxiety. We were able to work on those together, and also they made me feel more comfortable in my workspace, and I felt more accepted in a sense. Like, I just felt more accepted to be myself, you know, and I didn't feel as anxious about things in the workplace because I disclosed my autism to them. But if you want more factual stuff about employment and autism, basically less than 20% of all autistic people in the UK are in full-time employment, which is incredibly low because the amount of autistic people in the UK is in the hundreds of thousands. And really the pathway to employment for autistic people, I feel, is incredibly difficult. It took me hundreds of times, hundreds of interviews I had to go to in order to get into employment. It was incredibly difficult. I mean, the interview process doesn't help. The way that interviewers, you know, score you based on not just your answer, but the way you present yourself, the way you talk to them, the amount of eye contact you give someone as well, I just think is absolutely ridiculous. But so I feel that the interview process in the UK, like, it just hinders the employability of autistic people, really, which is incredibly sad to see.
Mostly just like it does for everyone else. There is the ADA, which requires people to not be discriminated against based on their disabilities. That's the Americans with Disabilities Act, I believe, here in the United States. So basically you can't discriminate hiring and such based on a disability. However, obviously you have to be able to complete the work. Someone with a diagnosis who wishes to disclose can ask for reasonable accommodations under the ADA for their job. Maybe they need a special chair or something like that. That's within reason for the company to be able to do, or to, you know, whatever it is. I've not experienced going through that in particular, but there is, you know, an area in which they can ask for reasonable accommodation for their disability to be able to work there. And the companies also get a tax break. So there are tax advantages here in the United States for employers to hire people who do have disabilities. I hope that helped you see some differences and similarities between the US and the UK when it comes to autism. I hope that you enjoyed hearing from Andy. Thank you so much, Andy, for being a part of this collaboration and being here on my channel. I really appreciate it. I'm actually going to link his channel in the description box below and in a card, hopefully. And I actually did a video with him over on his channel about the autism levels, which if you've been following me, you may have heard me mention a few times, being excited about going over that and doing that. So go ahead and check out his video. I'll also have that linked in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit the thumbs up and give it a like, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And I hope that I'll see you in my next video. Bye!